Webinar will begin shortly. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to How to Ensure a Successful Implementation and Project Plan for Workforce Management. My name is Doug Hans. I'm with JCPenney. We're going to be joined here today by Mark Jones, also with JCPenney, and Scott Brown of Sability. And we really appreciate everybody joining us here for the last session. What we want to do is level set a couple things to start with. One, we want to make sure you know that we're here, both Doug, Mark, and I, and Scott, and we're excited about presenting this. And we're going to give you a little background on how JCPenney is currently using workforce management. Then we're going to talk about the scope of the presentation, and then we'll jump into an exciting agenda of what we intend to cover. Let's just take a look at JCPenney and workforce management. We are on the Infor WorkBrain platform for workforce management, and we started the conversion to our 1,100 plus retail stores in 2006, and we completed them by 2007. We then converted 2 of our custom decorating fabrication factories and 7 retail stores in Puerto Rico in 2009, and converted 500 custom decorating studios and installation sites in 2010. Needless to say, you can see we're still in the process of implementing workforce management throughout our enterprise. Luckily, we've gotten smarter as the time has gone on, and we're going to share some of those learnings we've had with you today. Now, what we have deployed for workforce management in JCPenney is the budgeting, forecasting, optimized and fixed shift scheduling. We also have the schedule compliance component installed. We obviously use it for all of our time and attendance functions. We also use it for attendance management tracking, and we do have reporting. And we have just completed our design work for the conversion of the supply chain for workforce management. So that is our last major element that we have for that. Now, some of the big impact items we had with the conversion are following. We did roll out with our retail operations partners the budgeting, forecasting, and optimized scheduling piece. That was the big one. That is the one where the money is, and that's also the biggest one we had getting out there to have our biggest impact. We also have a workforce management portal out there that allows us to have our associates request time off, view their PTO balances, request a change in their availability, view schedules, and check their hours worked. And they can do that access from any PC that has internet access. So that's been a real boon that our associates can be engaged with the company while they're at home requesting that time off. One of the other big wins we have is retro functionality. Now, some people may know that as past week's payroll functionality, but our retro functionality allows our timesheets to be adjusted up to 5 weeks in the past should we find some discrepancies with punches for our associates. That has been a huge win for us because we've had that go all the way up to our payroll system so it calculates the FSLA rates correctly. So that's been real good for us. And also what we've done to help with communication is we've hooked up some alerts at our clock so our associates get notifications at a time clock. It says, see that portal, let them know there's some important information they may have. It may be as simple as your time off request has been approved or I've edited your punch, but it does help keep our associates in tune with what's going on. Now, for time clocks, I just want to let you know we do have those one hard wall clock in our stores, but we also have a soft clock on our POS registers, so we have a lot of accessibility to the systems. And of course, we rolled out attendance tracking, and that has really helped our attendance in the stores because now it's easier to keep track of who's been naughty and who's been nice. Now, I want to level set some of today's presentation to let you know the context which we'll be talking about. The implementation and project learnings are not vendor specific. These are things that we think would apply to all vendors of workforce management software. And this is some of what we did when we were rolling out workforce management, but it's also what we would do differently if we had the chance to roll out workforce management again. Now, obviously, as we move forward to more elements of our business, we take those learnings and we continue to apply them. So we like to think we're getting smarter as we go forward. Some real quick agenda topics, and boy, I wish we had more time than just the hour that was allocated because some of these topics certainly deserve more time than the hour that we have. But we want to talk about setting expectations, business owners and business process managers, and how important it is to have those folks engaged. An organized approach in the value of having a dedicated project manager, the use of best practices from vendor and consultants, load and stress testing, which Scott Brown's going to cover, and he's also going to cover forecasting, budgeting, and optimized scheduling. I'm then going to have Mark Jones take over, and he's going to cover change management, some local practices and standardizations and policies. He'll talk about reporting, and of course, business continuality and disaster recovery planning. So you're going to hear from three of us today on a number of different topics. Let's jump right into setting expectations. Well, let's talk about what expectations are. Expectations are your clients' and your executive's vision of the future, and it's critical to the project's success that these expectations are known. And let me give you a tip. They're usually verbally understated, but in their mind, they have this really great idea what workforce management is going to look like, but they don't necessarily express all of those expectations to you. So one learning is they're probably verbally understated, but they really have a great expectation for it. And we've also discovered they're more emotional and have more breadth than the actual detailed requirements. The vision or the expectation is probably a little broader than what is written on a piece of paper with the detailed requirements. Now, most people will have an elevated expectations of the vision and its end state of the delivered project. Once again, they have these broader visions of what they think the project will deliver. And the client's and executive's impression of the delivered project end state is critical to understanding if we have successful implementation. If we meet our clients' and executives' expectations, we've been successful. No matter where we have anything written, we've been successful. And how the clients and executives define success is how close the project comes to their expectations. And every decision they make is what drives the clients and executives' actions. So it's important to have these expectations absolutely nailed down and having everybody on the same page. We know because we've had some cases where we spent a lot of time trying to make sure those expectations were right. One of the things we've tried to adopt with setting expectations is what we call ETS. We establish the expectations, we track everybody's expectations, and we shape their expectations. By always working on ETS, we feel we have a better handle on how the project is going in everybody's mind. And just as a reminder, expectations are a moving target. I can't stress whether it's communicate and communicate again and continue to communicate, because expectations have a tendency to move. And let's be fair, not all things are known at the start of any project, so expectations are dynamic in nature, and making sure you keep level setting those expectations is so important to making sure we have a successful project. And with any lengthy project implementation, clients and executives can change, and when they do change, this results in a change in expectations. So it's important, once again, to track those expectations and make sure you're shaping them correctly, because the players have a tendency to keep changing a little bit. Let's talk about the importance of business process owner and the business process manager. And this is extremely important to identify these folks. So with the workforce management project, it touches many areas that can have multiple business owners and many different business managers. And identifying the business process owners and managers can start even before vendor selection. Start your spreadsheet of identifying who they are. If you get the buy-in early, they can even help define any questions you have for your RFIs and RFPs. And once again, these owners, it's not vendor specific. If you have the owner, it really doesn't make any difference what vendor you go with. They're still going to be engaged with the process. And it's necessary for the detail requirements phase. I guess what we're really saying there is eventually you're going to have to talk to these people anyway. And the sooner in the project plan you start talking to them, the easier the process is going to be, oh, by the way, to set their expectations. Now think about any areas that uses the data produced by workforce management as having an impact on the owners and managers. That's a great place to start to try to figure out who should be on your list to help shape those expectations. And you need to have some buy-in. They need to have some skin in the game to be a valued partner. You certainly want to bring them in early because you want to make them a partner, not an adversary when things start to change. Now, our definition of a business process owner is as follows. In our organization at JCPenney, it can be a vice president or a director level. They own the design of the process. And workforce management will impact them, and they have expectations. They also have the ability to change the workforce management design. And they can be from many different impacted areas of the business, such in our organization from the retail side or supply chain or the home office. And they can have the same managed process. And I guess the best example I have of that is when we sat down and when we started to roll out the attendance management module in workforce management, everybody had a different expectation of what late means. Is it 1 minute? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 6 minutes? Everybody had a definition that was a little different when it said, well, they went home sick. Some people say if they worked 7.5 hours of the 8-hour shift, they really didn't go home sick. Some people had an expectation, if you didn't finish your shift, you're sick. So those are the people who can shape the definition of what sick means. So it's important that business process owners involved with discussion so they can help you define some of those elements of workforce management. Now, the business process manager, they own the operation and the administration of the process. They have the ability to change the business process and just make minor design changes. Workforce management may require process changes or a tighter definition of policies and practices. And I'll go back to our attendance example. That's exactly what we had to define. We had to define the policies and practices of attendance. And once that was known, the business process manager, the one who really works on that and implements that daily, is in tune to what needs to be done. And there are cases where the business process owner and the business process manager might be the same person, which is great because it makes the discovery process much easier, and you only have one other person to set with those expectations with. Now, business process owner and the business process manager, they're more closely. You can align all of those folks in workforce management, the better off you're going to be. If you have different silos of different businesses in your enterprise, if you can get them all on the same page, it can have a profound impact on workforce management. It can make the configuration less complicated. It can lower your total cost of ownership because you don't have as many configurations to keep track of and processes and manuals to produce. It makes it an easier upgrade process if you need to do that, only from the standpoint you don't have as many test cases to execute. Obviously, it'll allow for faster deployment, once again, probably for the test cases and configuration. It reduces your costs because it's quicker. It may even simplify your hierarchy design because you don't have to have as many separate folks lined up in there. And it lessens the need for additional security groups, and we all can only imagine how difficult sometimes groups can be. If there are multiple owners of a process with multiple businesses, attempt to standardize those processes to what is best for the interest of the enterprise. And that, once again, can almost tie back to setting your expectations. Getting everybody's expectations on the same page makes it easier when you're trying to align all these different things when it comes to rolling out workforce management. And this even applies to not only rolling out workforce management. If you're going through a major upgrade or a change, you may have to go back and revisit all these folks again because there may be new functionality that comes out that almost needs to be treated as if it's a brand new implementation in some cases. Let's talk about the organization and the project manager real quickly. Beyond the normal stuff of Microsoft project timelines, budgets, organized project dependencies, and status reports, there's other key things the project manager can do for you. They can communicate and level set expectations and influence the business owners and managers. And I can tell you that the project manager should be spending the majority of their time working with these different folks in the organization to make sure their expectations are right, they know where the project is, and everything is going to be just as they expect it to be at the end. Now, there are some advantages I want to point out to an external project manager that's not necessarily closely linked to the political environment of a company. Might more easily be able to ask the tough questions of the business process owners. If you remember, we talked about trying to align all those policies and practices because it's easier to roll out workforce management if the things are similar. Very often these external managers can do that because they're not as closely linked with these people and maybe you don't have to live with them after it's rolled out. Now, the project manager and our recommendation must be separated from the operational duties. If they need to be 100% focused on the tactical and strategic vision of your workforce management project. If they're still trying to keep the legacy systems up and going, sometimes that causes some conflict as to what they should be doing. So it's best if you can have that project manager totally focused on your workforce management project. Now I want to talk a little bit about best practices from vendors and consultants. And these are things that we've learned going through a number of implementations in our organization. We've tried to approach this by thinking about it as a lean process. Now, when we say lean, we want to reduce waste in movements and functions and activities. We want to make this more efficient. Now, when you hear lean or you look up the definition of lean on the internet, you're going to find it's mostly associated with manufacturing processes producing a product. Well, when we thought about it, we discovered that workforce management software does actually produce a product. The product it produces is forecasts, optimized schedules, reports, timesheets, a myriad of different things that we expect the workforce management program to produce. The processes that you have to deal with that you can look at for efficiencies are possibly editing schedule, how to handle time off requests, how do you fix timesheet exceptions, and closing payroll. So there's a lot of products that workforce management will produce through the magic of the software, and there's a lot of processes that need to be examined. Implementation of workforce management offers an opportunity for change. It offers an opportunity to review all of these products and processes and make improvements on them. Now, when we talk about the best practices for vendors and consultants, they can be very helpful because they have multi-company experience to share the best practices for processes and policies. And we've certainly tried to utilize their industry knowledge of other companies because they can have a conversation with the business process owner that it may have more credibility when you're asking them to do a change. When you're presenting a business case to make a change in their process or how they handle things, they can bring to the table all that experience that may influence the business process owner to make the change, which in fact should help you roll out your project faster and make it easier to maintain. Now, I will say you make sure you have dedicated internal resources to assure that all of your company's specific requirements are met. Just don't turn it over and let the vendors and the consultants handle it. Make sure you have somebody in lockstep with those fine folks so we can make sure what we get delivered is what the company is expecting. Now, another thing we've had great success with here, and we have done this, is co-locating teams of the company's employees and the consultants. Sometimes we've had the consultants in one room and our employees in another room or at their desk. And what we've discovered is if you can have them all in one big room, it makes one big happy family. Well, maybe not a happy family, but it does make for knowledge transfer, which is what we're trying to get at. Because the consultants have the knowledge, and one really good way to transfer that knowledge is to collate the consultants and the company team members while completing the work. That way there's that interaction and they learn from each other. If you know what your organization will look like after the implementation, you can even structure the teams to assure that knowledge transfer. The more forward thinking and planning you can do to decide what your organization and your company is going to look like when you're done can help you decide who you want working closely together. Because when the consultant leaves, the knowledge will stay because eventually the organization is probably going to be responsible for the operational support of the software long term. So make sure any consultants and vendors that come in, you have everybody working together as closely as you can. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Scott Brown of Sability, who's going to talk about load and stress testing and schedule optimization. Scott, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Doug. So I'm Scott Brown. We're one of those consultants that Doug was referring to on the last slide. We've assisted JCPenney with their workforce management rollout and continue to help them with some of the challenges they face today. One area that we've helped out a bit with is load and stress testing. And Doug, if you wouldn't mind advancing, there you go. Thank you, sir. Benchmarking and load testing is paramount to guarantee a successful implementation. Know this, whenever you're undergoing a system conversion or transformation, upgrade, or new implementation, you are putting your organization at risk. There's always going to be some level of risk, and our goal is to drive that risk as near to zero as possible. One of the areas that has great risk upon cutover is system performance. So that is the goal of load and stress testing, is to reduce the risk that once you go live, that the system is going to fail to perform, that the system will crash or go down, or really won't meet the expectations of the users. One of the first things that you need to do is establish your load testing goals. What is the response time you're looking for out of the system? How quickly should reports run? And another thing a lot of people don't think about is what is the capacity you really need in the system over the next year, over the next couple of years, because you probably don't want to come up and immediately run out of capacity as soon as you have a hiring push. Part of the goal setting is to define and simulate a load that's going to be representative of what's going to go on in the system. It's sometimes not as easy to do as you might think, but again, think in terms of some of your worst case scenarios. A lot of people, that would be around payroll close. For workforce management systems, it might also be on Friday when supervisors are correcting and updating timesheets. In the case of schedule optimization, optimization routines typically put a large burden on the computer system, on the CPU. So running those simulations is important as well. And if for some reason those would be running during the day, you need to simulate a user load as well, exercising the system on the front end. That would go for calculation processes as well. You probably are going to want to push the system to the breaking point. It's probably not good enough to know that you can actually simulate the load that you're expecting, but you're probably going to want to know how much gas do I have left in the system. Again, that's another criteria that you wanted to define when you're establishing your goals. There's really three possible outcomes of your load testing. The first one's going to be the system functions well with an adequate growth capacity, and again, the growth capacity you've defined in your load testing goals. The second is system functions well with inadequate or no growth capacity, and basically you're coming up with a situation where you don't have any capacity, and so you're going to have to make a system change before. That's not a good situation. And probably one of the worst results is the system cannot support the required concurrent users. And in a situation like this, it's usually possible to go through a tuning exercise, and typically we find we don't add necessarily any hardware, but vary some of the system parameters at the database level, at the app server level, or possibly within the application to make sure that you're meeting your goals. Okay, system availability. Workforce management. Workforce management is possibly one of the highest employee-facing systems that you have in terms of profile. If your workforce management system goes down, you're probably not going to be able to schedule your employees. You're probably not going to be able to record punches, and it really is necessary for business continuity. System availability also should be thought about as a continuum. It ranges from a little system degradation where the system feels a little slow, the system feels a little sluggish, all the way to a full outage. We recently had a client we were engaged by where their workforce management system was essentially unusable during payroll closes and caused the organization not only a lot of lost time, but a lot of animosity toward that system. In the event of system outages, you need to think in terms of disaster recovery or disaster support. There's a range of solutions that can be employed. A high-end solution would be a fully redundant, geographically dispersed primary and failover systems. So what that means is basically you have a couple of computer systems running, one being the primary, another standalone backup, which is another area of the country or perhaps on another continent if you're multinational. A lower end, you might revert back to Excel or perhaps even using paper forms or time cards. Again, that is a valid backup system if it meets your needs. Both solutions need to be documented, tested, and exercised. You really need to go beyond, I guess, the testing or thinking it's going to work to just fully exercising the system in a controlled environment, because if you are in the midst of a disaster and your systems go down, you're going to have a bit of chaos on your hands, and you're going to know exactly what you want to do and how you should do it, and have the confidence that the system will work for you. Forecasting, budgeting, and optimized scheduling. Some of the scheduling requirements and ramifications are compliance. The legalities vary across states and across countries. Organizational, the system must meet the goals of the organization. Sociological, this is often ignored to a company's peril, and a quick search of the internet will probably show you some instances where there were some very dissatisfied workers as a result of over-aggressive optimized scheduling. But perhaps the biggest part is the change management task, which is often ignored. And I know Mark's going to talk about that quite a bit, but again, I want to emphasize that it's communication, and you should communicate and communicate some more. Some of the human factors related to optimized scheduling. What we have here is a graph. Along the vertical axis is a measure of productivity, and along the horizontal axis is resource utilization. So if you look to the left along the horizontal axis, in the area denoted by the 1, you'll notice that people are not very busy, and also there's really not a whole lot going on. So the productivity is very low or effectively zero. As your utilization increases, or as people get busy, you notice in 2 that the productivity starts to climb up to a point, which is denoted by 3. So you'll notice at 3, you're at maximum productivity, but your utilization is not 100%. And again, this is what I was alluding to in terms of pushing over-aggressive optimized scheduling and pushing the utilization beyond to an area of diminishing returns in terms of productivity. And I think we can all relate to this. I think a good term in 4 is as you push people into utilization above 80% or so, excuse me, you get into what's been termed the coping zone. And that means that people are really struggling to keep up with their work. They really don't have time to contemplate, time to think. Errors increase, hence productivity falls. Next up, we have forecasting, budgeting, and optimized scheduling. Again, these are areas where workforce management systems typically obtain huge returns on investments. And a lot of times, they carry the burden of justifying the cost of implementing a workforce management system. They reduce labor costs. Really, you can be shown as a percentage of sales or actual dollars. Your goal really is to increase productivity, get the right people doing the right things at the right time and the right jobs. Another goal is to increase or guarantee service levels to customers. And again, what this means, I'm sure everybody's had the experience of walking into a store and not finding anyone on the sales floor that can be of help, and you get frustrated and you leave. The goal is to capture that, to make sure that you have the right resources on the floor to service your customers so that you don't have revenue walking out the door. The optimization models that we're using today are based on mixed integer optimization theory. And really the application of these theories to the workforce is a fairly recent development. right around early to mid-90s, and is when we first started seeing these systems rolled out. Although organizations are getting good at return on the investment, and there's plenty to be had with optimization, it's still a discipline. There are a number of factors that I actually talked about in the future of workforce management, some of which are related to hardware that's in existence today that soon will be available to allow much more complex scheduling algorithms, which involve a lot more factors. One of the key elements also is you're moving from decentralized to centralized management of schedules. And take, for example, since we're talking about JCPenney's rollout, stores. Possibly before you rolled out or defined optimized scheduling, typically a store manager would be responsible for generating his own store schedule, when his employees showed up, who showed up, what time they worked. You're essentially taking that away from him. He used to kind of be mayor of his own store, and he's actually losing quite a bit of control over his store. So how do you mitigate that? I mean, obviously, if you went out and asked a store manager, what do you feel? Do you feel like you can generate a better schedule, or do you think the computer is going to generate a better schedule? I think I know the answer to what 90% of those guys would say. So somehow you've got to get their confidence factor up that the schedules that are generated are going to work for them. Piloting is essential, not only to test the system readiness and make sure that it's going to do what you expect it to do, but perhaps as important or more important is to seek out those store managers who have the respect of other store managers who typically are a little opposed to change. If you can win those guys over, they're going to be your best salesman. And again, this is a marketing and a sales effort to get these people on board so that your adoption goes smoothly. Managers will have certain discretion under the new system. Typically, they're constrained by the budget, so they can shuffle people around and try and tweak and tune the schedule. But again, their experience as they get to know the system, and again, I've talked at great length with JCPenney about this, that they do find that although managers think they can probably improve upon the schedule, typically that's not the case. That a little bit of discretion is good, but sticking with the generated schedules that were produced by the computer typically has the better result. Okay, retail forecasting. Forecasting really is the key schedule driver. It's revenue-based. It's typically broken down differently by each retailer category. Department stores may have a different profile than perhaps automotive supply stores. You always need to take into account special periods, also known as special days. These would be things like holidays, which may fall on different days of the week, impacting sales. Also, our recent weather activity certainly should be factored into forecasts of historical events for next year, or you're going to be way off on your store schedule. Optimized schedule is really based on a combination of forecasting and retail budgeting. Now, retail budgeting is used to tune and confirm the models. Finance loves it, but they really have got to be involved from the first because they're really not only a back-end driver, but they also drive the process from the top down, starting with the annual projection. And then the forecast drives the model from the bottom up. And again, they seek to find a happy medium about what exactly is the ideal model. Budgeting allows for the mirroring of the two goals, with the biggest driver being convenience and integration with scheduling. Again, getting them on the same platform so they're using the same data will allow you to have better optimizations. And the end product is the output of schedules that meet the financial goals. Another point that I wanted to make specifically around optimization is Once you get the system up and you get it implemented, it is not done. Optimization models can really require continual tuning and tweaking. Think of them as a hedgerow. You really need to prune back. You need to watch where they're growing. You need to be aware of different economic factors and other factors within the environment that would impact your schedules. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Doug, and I think Mark is up with change management.
Thanks, Scott. So we're going to talk just a little bit here about some change management, as Scott mentioned. So we don't want to underestimate it because it's going to be much bigger than you think. And in our implementation of workforce management at JCPenney, most all of our associates were impacted with that implementation. So it's important that the appetite for change management from your stakeholders and the business process owners, they need to be gauged, and you need to, I guess, adjust with that based on how the implementation or the changes are going. Also, really, even the best business processes or process changes won't work if those business owners and those managers are not championing that change. So, what in change management we're talking about here, there's a lot on the slide. We're really talking about knowing your audience, knowing the groups of your associates that are going to be impacted, the work that they perform, and how that workforce management system is going to impact them. So, for example, at JCPenney, so our frontline employees, what do they do with workforce management? What are those tasks, and how will that impact them, change their work life? So, really, time off requests, availability, scheduling, access to information. In the same way, through each of those audience groups, you need to develop an understanding of how they're going to be impacted and how their lives are going to be impacted with the implementation of that system and how you're going to communicate it to them. So for us, it's the supervisors, our frontline managers, HR clerks, unit managers, and of course our district, regional, and corporate partners. How are they going to use the system, get information from it, and how does it impact their day-to-day business? Additionally, it wouldn't be appropriate if we didn't talk a little bit about money. So when you're talking about change management and all those different audience groups, how are you going to support that, and how are they going to be able to understand their new roles within the workforce management system? You need to budget, and you need to understand that that's probably going to be somewhere in training, because it is in some case, or in most cases, it does revolve a lot around training of those associates. So you want to consider things such as employee handouts, posters, CDs, webcasts, guides and manuals, and some other things such as maybe some interactive training materials or systems. And even in many cases, you may have a bilingual translation cost, so you're going to offer different languages within the application that you're implementing, and those are all charges and costs to the organization, but the products will help make that transition to workforce management much smoother if you budget and think about how they'll be needed on the implementation, but also, as we've mentioned here at the end, really on an ongoing basis. All of these training needs and change management pieces will continue to some degree after you implement and you're supporting this new workforce management system. Now let's talk a little bit about local practices, standardization, policies, and focus groups. So the first bullet here, crisis of the day. So what I'm going to really talk about or mention is that's really local practices. So as you begin this journey, you're going to find things that are going on in your units or different parts of the country that are not necessarily policies, but they're just practices. They're business processes that are really contradictory to the way you want to develop this new workforce management system. So you need to address them head on, and this is another place where you can, as Scott said, communicate and communicate again, not with just these local associates or employees, but also with your business process owners, and your stakeholders need to be involved when these changes or decisions are made. Next, let's talk a little bit about becoming standardized. The more standardization there is, the more process efficiency that can be achieved. That's very important in this implementation of workforce management. And it also impacts greatly change management. Also, your documentation and your training, all of that will be simplified the more standardization that can be achieved in this process. Also, your support, we talked a little bit about that through change management. Your support initially and ongoing will become much easier the more processes and practices that we can standardize. And remember, there always are going to be some things primarily through state or local laws that you simply aren't going to be able to standardize, and you may have to work around. But finally, with regard to policy, this is always one that's been difficult for us, and that it's difficult and expensive to program around exceptions. So when you're dealing with policy, we would ask, or we think the best way to address it is challenge the need to program around different policies with a cost. So that makes it easier when you go to your stakeholder or your business process owner, and you can associate a cost with whatever that change is going to be. Now let's talk some about focus groups, and I'm going to throw in here pilots as well. So really focus groups and pilots, they're going to help you from a change management perspective because you want them to share that vision. You want to get them early on understanding what workforce management is, your vision of the future, and how that's going to be beneficial to them, but the company as well. And ideally, have leaders in each of those areas or audiences that we looked at earlier be part of this and become early advocates of this new program. And some of the things that it will help you do, it'll help you create a positive buzz about your project and its benefits. It'll help dispel, as we all know, rumors and things that are, come out that are not necessarily true. And when you start to implement, you're going to have fewer surprises for all of those folks. Once they get up on workforce management, it'll make it much easier for you. And this is really a place, if your company's using a social media tool or any applications, for you to really use it. It'll be to your benefit. Now let's talk about reporting. So with regard to reporting, at least from our perspective, in workforce management, it's not really a business intelligence tool type reporting. It's most likely used, it's not used really for broad-based corporate-wide decisions out of the workforce management application at our unit level. In our case, it's been used at the unit level, employee level primarily, and it's to run operational needs from day-to-day businesses. And the key things to remember here for a workforce management application, especially in our implementation, it's ease of use and really friendly for that end user on a quick, as-needed basis. And really, from a workforce management perspective in our units, what can it really do for us? Well, primarily, it's really increased engagement. So when I say that, it's provided a compelling reason for our associates to go to our workforce management portal and see some things and how they work within the application. But three things to remember: that must be reliable, timely, and relevant. If you cannot really get those three things out of whatever you're providing your associates, it's not going to help you as much as you would like. Finally, it's helped us reduce a lot of our late payroll corrections, and that's been beneficial for us. Also, from a support perspective, we reduced our HR questions to some of our support areas and to some of our HR generalist areas. And our employees have become much more self-sufficient and understand, I guess, more on a personal level, the time they work, their PTO, paid time off balances, or really any balance information and time off request information. They've become much more self-sufficient in using the system and understanding our policies and practices once we've become more efficient in those areas. And lastly, we use the term transparency a lot, and this has been very beneficial, or workforce management has been very beneficial for us from a reporting side, from the transparency that this portal has offered our associates to be able to go in and monitor all this information on an as-needed basis. Now let's talk a little bit about on-demand. So since on-demand really runs off your production database, and I know Scott mentioned this about benchmarking and performance testing, reporting is an area it's really, really important you understand how on-demand reports are going to impact you. So, and Doug mentioned lean, so you really need to limit the number of on-demand reports to truly what is needed. And here we talk about also, remember that lean concept. So, because the bottom line is it's really drawing on resources that you want to use from your system to make sure that our associates are getting what they need other than just reports. So be lean and mean on those on-demand reports. It'll really help you out. Something that may be beneficial, or another way to look at it, is you may have some things that you can run overnight on a batch process. All your users say, or a lot of times your business process owners initially may want everything now, but this is another case where if you work with your business process owners and your stakeholders, you can provide even more information than you do now, but you can provide it on the off hours or off-peak hours, and then you can provide it the next day or on a schedule. And we talked about being consistent and timely and accurate. Well, a lot of times that batch process allows you to do that, and it frees up and allows your associates to be more productive during the online day. So that is helpful. Another thing that we like to use, or an acronym, is one version of the truth. You know, no matter where you work, it seems like, you know, companies have multiple versions of maybe the same data or what they mean. So I'm just going to use an example of here is when you look at hours, you know, is it all hours worked? Is it hours worked, productive and non-productive? And then when you get into paid hours not worked, workforce management, and I know Doug and Scott both mentioned, it gives us an opportunity to try to get to one version of the truth, or at least maybe two versions of the truth. So make sure you go through all your processes and don't not take the opportunity to really call it down. Finally, just some things on reports maybe to remember. There's always a high degree of unrealistic expectations about reports. So you're going to have to wade through that with your stakeholders and your your stakeholders and your business process owners. And when you're developing your hierarchy up front, a lot of what you do is going to impact the reports that are easily built within the system. So it's never too early to start thinking about reports. Also, the impact of going live on the workforce management system. You're going to have some stores on, some stores off. What does that mean about reports? Also, make sure, I kind of mentioned that in just a minute, a little bit earlier, is find out all the reports that you run from the multiple businesses and understand the needs up front. And try to justify the reasons or the needs for customizations for any additional reports, because customization costs are high, especially in the reporting piece. It's an area which customization tends to run up quickly. And finally, we mentioned that, at least from our perspective, the reporting piece for workforce management really wasn't a BI tool or a BI reporting, or what we think of as business intelligence reporting. So this may be a good place where you can throw another project into conjunction with your workforce management implementation to look at spending some more money for a BI tool to help you in the future. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about business continuity. It's important that you review your tolerances for risk and your needs. What really needs to, if you do have an issue, what do you really need to cut over to? How much functionality is really needed for a cutover on some type of issues? And remember that once you deploy workforce management and you've met these expectations and things are really good, it doesn't take but once or twice to have major problems for you to really lose a lot of the momentum that you've come to have once you've implemented workforce management. So you need to ask the tough questions early and develop strategy and plans on on how you're going to make those things happen, such as, what if your HR files are late or you don't get them at all? How are you going to handle that? Schedule generations are missed. Your data centers are down. How are you going to continue to manage your operations? So those are big things that need to be addressed. Also some things such as process changes, such as natural disasters. Can you remotely close payroll for maybe your support centers? All of those things need to be done and thought through and work through with your team. So I'm going to turn it back over to Doug, and he's going to sum up for today.
Hey, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Scott. I do have just a couple thoughts here for the summary. It's set the expectations with those stakeholders and clients, business process owners, managers, executives, vendors, consultants, team members, and your family that you're going to be tied up for a long time working on a workforce management project. Also, don't underestimate the time and the impact and the cost to get change management right. That is a huge factor, and I think even Scott talked about it in his presentation. For this to be successful, it has to be accepted. It has to be accepted by the people who are using it. All the users have to accept it. If you underfund or underestimate change management, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle all the way, regardless of how great the software or the project appears to be. And also, have a robust and realistic backup and failover plans in place to assure business continuity and recovery. And by all means, you want to make sure you take the opportunity to go out there and test those and make sure they're actually going to work. Because like it or not, there's going to come a time when you're going to need those. And if you don't have those in place, it probably can hurt the reputation of what could have been a great project rolled out and working like a champ. And then when something goes wrong, it could tarnish the project. So make sure you have the realistic backup and failover plans in place. And with that, I'm going to leave one slide here in closing, and it's just the contact information for myself and Mark and Scott. I can speak for Mark and I. We always like talking about workforce management, so don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's some need or a question you'd like to have. We're always glad to have those conversations with everybody, and of course Scott's there as well to help you out with that. With that, we have just a couple minutes left. I'm going to give it just a couple seconds to see if any questions are going to come in, and I suspect they won't be on a Friday afternoon, but if there are any questions, we'll just take the next 3 or 4 minutes to try to answer them. And if no questions come in while we're waiting, I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today. We appreciate you tuning in and listening to us on our thoughts of workforce management. Again, we look forward to you completing that survey at the end of the presentation so you can let us know how we've done. Looking over the message board right now, I don't see any questions coming in, which is about what we expected being the last group up on a Friday. But once again, you've got our contact information up on the screen there. If you do think of anything after the broadcast, after the conversation, just let us know. Hang on just a second there, folks. We do have a question coming in. And the question was, is the entire JCPenney organization now up on workforce management? And question in parentheses is all stores. And yes, all of our retail stores are up on workforce management. So all of our units are up, which makes JCPenney unique. We have some very small stores in some very small towns that are probably 10 or 15,000 square foot operations, up to some that are over 300,000 square feet. So it's a challenge to get it to work in JCPenney, but we always look forward to a challenge. So that was one question I did say that came in. And I don't see any other questions coming in right now, but once again, you've got our contact information there. We thank you for participating in today's. Fill out that questionnaire as it comes up there, and let's make it a great weekend.